Is BYU football coach Kalani Sitake on the hot seat going into year 2 of their Big 12 era? One national pundit believes so. I completely disagree, and I'll explain ahead on today's show.
You are Locked On Cougars, your daily podcast on the BYU Cougars, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is up, everybody? I'm Jake Hatch, your host here on Locked On Cougars, resident BYU insider. Thank you for making Locked On Cougars your first listen or view of the day, and a big thank you to all of you who we like to call everydayers right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. This is your original daily podcast focused on the BYU Cougars, and today's show is brought to you by our friends over at Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the promo code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase with our friends at Game Time. Of course, terms apply. All right, let's dive right in on today's show, and I'm just going to put it right at the outset. Today's show is dominated by you, the listeners. I asked for questions via our Locked On Cougars Insider group. A couple of you also had submitted questions via social media channels and the like. But we're going to start off today's show with one question I think that dominated. It kind of piqued my interest, quite frankly, and it's something that I probably should have talked about earlier in the week, but no time like the present to get to it. Question comes in via Devin. It says this: Jake, Dennis Dodd from CBS Sports wrote an article this week explaining the tiers of hot seats for coaches. He put Kalani Sitake on the second hottest tier looking at this upcoming season. Is Kalani Sitake in danger of losing his job should BYU miss out on another bowl game this season? I will say this right now. I believe that Dennis Dodd is trying to generate clicks with a lot of the stuff he writes, especially in this circumstance. If you tell me that Kalani Sitake is going to lose his job just 2 years into BYU, leaping up to the Power 4 level, and they're going to kick him to the curb, what coach, I don't care, any coach out there, in their right mind is going to be like, you know what I want to do? I want to go to BYU, where they essentially just forced a guy out that helped lead them into the Power 4 level, and after 2 seasons, they kicked him to the curb and said, yeah, thanks, but no thanks. That is asking for, I think, for a major uphill climb to find a coach capable of leading BYU to higher heights. And maybe I'm wrong about this. Let's acknowledge that fact. But I believe that Kalani Sitake is not in danger of losing his job this season, barring a major off-field scandal that would, I think, be brewing right now that would really have to come down in a wave and wipe out Kalani Sitake, or B, for BYU to essentially have the wheels completely come off this season, go like 1-11, or they've only gone winless in a regular season in BYU football history once. It was back in like the 1950s, if I recall correctly. So if they were to go winless, that might force Tom Holmoe's hand to let Kalani Sitake go. But the way that Kalani Sitake is talking, the way I'm hearing about things from within the football program, I don't expect BYU to bottom out this season. Now, things could happen that obviously could cause that. But for Dennis Dodd, and let's read what Dennis Dodd had to say about this. He wrote this earlier this week. He had Kalani Sitake. He's a 5-tier system, and the number 5 is win now or else. And the only coach on that win now or else level is down at Arkansas with Sam Pittman. He has got to absolutely win. The next tier up is start improving now. And you wrote this about BYU. Did the Big 12 expose BYU, or is 2023 a dip in the Cougars' fortunes? This season will go a long way towards answering that question. BYU gave Sitake a contract extension in 2021 through 2027 after a 29-9 run from 2018 to 2020. The Cougars promptly went 5-7 in the first season in the Big 12, beating only 3 FBS teams. Without Texas and Oklahoma, by the way, he's wrong about that. It's 4 FBS teams because Sam Houston State was an FBS program. But nonetheless, without Texas and Oklahoma, the league is wide open. BYU is being mentioned nowhere near the top of contention. Since going 11-1 in 2020, the Cougars have declined each of the next 3 seasons. Beating Arizona and Oklahoma State at home in back-to-back October weeks seems like a must. Okay, here's the deal about BYU. BYU is a program that is going to be a little more cautious versus many of their compatriots out there in the college football universe. Yes, if things were to completely bottom out, Tom Holmoe would not hesitate in pulling the ejector seat and saying, okay, we got to try something different. But he is going to give Kalani Sitake every benefit of the doubt to be able to go out and show that he is capable of being the coach that can lead BYU to really, really good seasons here at the Power 4 level. let's just say for hypothetical sake, things do bottom out and BYU were to make a move and they essentially turn to Jay Hill and say, hey, Jay, you want to take over this program? Jay's essentially going to tell him, okay, you just kicked Kalani to the curb for not living up to expectations. Well, what are those expectations of BYU? They are playing at a level of football they have never competed at before. And spare me LaVell Edwards won a national championship. I get all that. It was a different era of football. We can acknowledge it was 40 years ago, everybody. And I'm not trying to be trite about it. I'm not trying to be disingenuous. But the simple fact of the matter is, if you were to pull the plug on Kalani just 2 years into BYU's Big 12 era, I don't think you'd have a lot of candidates busting down that door of BYU saying, I want to be the guy that takes over for Kalani. I think you'd be hard-pressed to find somebody that is going to be capable of getting BYU over the proverbial hump, whatever that hump is in BYU administration's eyes. I don't think Kalani Sitake is in trouble. Moreover, I don't think he's in trouble for at least 2 more seasons because they mentioned the fact that he has the contract extension through 2027. BYU does not want to get in the business of paying massive buyouts to their coaches. That's just been nothing that BYU's really ever done before, and I don't think they want to start today in doing that. I think that Kalani Sitake is going to have a longer runway than many might believe out there. Could I look completely foolish with this type of statement? If it were to come out that he was a kick to the curb, sure, I could look foolish. But I sincerely believe that Kalani Sitake is at least comfortable through 2026. That may seem like a long road for you to be able to endure as a Cougar fan out there, because I see some of the comments you guys have about Kalani and him being in over his head at times. I understand your take on things, but BYU is going to give him, I believe, a longer runway than other Power 4 level programs would give many coaches, simply due to the fact that BYU is a program and a university that is not wanting to get into the turn it over often, because the other fact of the matter is, even though Tom Holmoe has said it's not a rule that is set in stone, you're never not going to have an active member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints leading the BYU football program. And it's happened once in their 100 years of BYU football. Hal Kopp was the only non-member head coach in BYU football history, and he left after, I think, 2 or 3 seasons amidst an NCAA investigation, and it just was not a good fit. BYU is going to have I like to call him, card-carrying member of the LDS faith leading this football program. There are not a lot of coaches out there who have proven themselves at a high enough level that I think be ready-made replacements for Kalani Sitake outside of, frankly, Jay Hill, Morgan Scalley. Those really two seem to be the only names that I could imagine that would be on the wish list for BYU if they were to make a move away from Kalani Sitake. So, yes, there is a lot to prove this season for the Cougars. They need to get to 6-6. They've got to prove that they can improve from last season. They got a tougher schedule, I believe, overall going into this year than they had a year ago. And that obviously will have some of you saying, why do you think they can make an improvement, Jake? I think they can make an improvement simply due to the fact that they've had another year of recruiting at the Power 4 level. They had a really, really good close to the recruiting class last year. And I believe that the better days for BYU football are in their future versus in their past. 2020 was an anomaly. To use that as like kind of the barometer here to say that BYU has fallen from grace since 2020. People like to deride the 2020 season and say that BYU was a paper tiger and Zach Wilson was a beneficiary of BYU playing nobody that season. You can't have it both ways with that 2020 campaign. It was a really, really fun year. BYU won a lot of football games. There's no doubt about that. But you cannot say that a year that had all kinds of disjointed schedules, some teams played 4 games, teams like BYU played, was it 11 or 12? Don't use that as the barometer for success for BYU. I believe that Tom Holmoe is going to be very, very cautious in going about making a move and having to pay a buyout and having to hire a new staff and having to pay X gazillion dollars, it feels like, in this day and age of college football to afford to get the coach that he wants in place in Provo and give them the adequate guarantees, the assurances they are looking for to feel comfortable taking that job. That is why I believe that this is a misguided judgment from Dennis Dodd to put Kalani Sitake on this tier. I would put him because he's got tiers. So obviously untouchable. He's got, you're not going anywhere. They're safe and secure, all good for now, and pressure is mounting. I would say Kalani Sitake is hovering somewhere between all good for now, so level 2, and pressure is mounting. More importantly, I think the biggest pressure, and few of you like to deride me for defending Aaron Roderick as BYU's offensive coordinator. I think the biggest pressure this season for anybody on that staff is sitting with Aaron Roderick. If BYU goes out and falls flat on their face proverbially this year offensively, yeah, Aaron Roderick could pay the price and lose his gig as BYU's offensive coordinator. That, I believe, is where the most pressure is on this BYU football program. It's not on Kalani Sitake. I believe it's on his offensive staff, in particular, Aaron Roderick. The other part about it is I just don't see BYU getting into this mode of wanting to turn over a coach every 2 to 3 seasons. That's a really, really bad formula for success. You look at some of these programs historically who have done that on a regular basis, and how much success do those programs really have? You want to have continuity. You want to have guys who want to be at your university. Kalani is a BYU guy through and through. He grew up a Cougar fan. He lived his dream of playing college football for the famed and late LaVell Edwards. And he had one ambition as a head coach, so far as I am aware, through in his coaching tenure, was to become the head coach at his alma mater and lead BYU football. You could do a lot worse than having guys like that leading your football program. Yes, there are other coaches out there that I believe could do the job at BYU, but I do not see year 2 of the Big 12 Conference being the year that BYU pulls the plug on the Kalani Sitake run. I just do not see that happening. And if I'm wrong about that, famous last words, and feel free to put me on freezing cold takes if and when it happens. All right, coming up here in just a minute, we're going to talk about another question from a listener that I have been promising to get to. Who are the top 4 faces / names on the proverbial or the hypothetical BYU Mount Rushmore? I've had a chance to consider this, and we're going to give you my answers coming up next, right here on Locked On Cougars. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at Game Time. Now, Game Time is here for you guys no matter what you're into. If you're looking to get out to a baseball game this summer, you want to go to an MLB game, the best part about MLB games for me is it's the highest level of baseball, but it's not the intensity where you can't have a conversation with a friend. That's one of my favorite things about going to the ballpark is you can go out, enjoy a dog, and just sit back and enjoy the ambiance and also watch high-level sports. It's just there's nothing like it when it comes to MLB. The best part is Game Time is an authorized ticket marketplace of Major League Baseball, which makes getting your tickets faster and easier. And actually, the prices on the Game Time app actually go down the closer it gets to the first pitch. So with killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and the lowest price guarantee, Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying your MLB tickets. They want to help you guys out today. Additionally, they also have the lowest price guarantee, or Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference that you paid for your tickets. You also can see the views from your seat right there inside the app. 2 taps, the tickets are purchased, and you're on your way to the game or games you're going to. So take the guesswork out once again out of buying your MLB tickets and do it with our friends over at Game Time. Download the Game Time app today, create an account, and use the promo code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Once again, terms apply. Create an account, redeem the promo code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE. That's Locked On College for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. Thank you once again for making Locked On Cougars your first listen of the day. If you have not done so already, I encourage you guys to check out our first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. It's also now available on Amazon Fire TV and the free Fire TV channels app. It is called Locked On Sports Today, and it is here for you 24/7 current top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league as well. Find Locked On Sports Today now available wherever you get your podcasts on YouTube and also on the free Amazon Fire TV channels app right away. All right, next question that came in here comes from our good friend Andy. It says this: BYU Sports Mount Rushmore. I'm not letting you off the hook. Now, Andy has asked this question a couple of times, and I'm going to answer right now, Andy, because you reminded me of it, and I had been thinking about it. So, Mount Rushmore, maybe you know it's a national monument. It's a national park. I don't remember I think it might be a national monument, but there are 4 of the greatest presidents in United States history carved into a mountain out there in South Dakota. So, that is the parameters. Who are the 4 faces of BYU athletics in BYU history? Well, number 1, LaVell Edwards. There's no if, and, or but about it. He is the first name. He is going to be leading the pack because when you had the run that he had, resurrecting or really building what BYU football is in this modern age, they had gone through 50 years of mediocre to crap as a football program, and he lifted them to a national championship. He is far and away the lead iconograph or photograph or bust on the Mount Rushmore for BYU athletics. Number 2 on this list, Jim McMahon. Why Jim McMahon, Jake? Because Jim McMahon revolutionized what BYU football could be. And he was brash, he was outspoken, but more importantly, he has always been a guy that has been willing to speak his mind, but also backed it up with his play on the field. When you said as many records, was it 80 some odd records during his prolific career as a BYU Cougar? Yeah, he is going to get the nod from me over the likes of Robbie Bosco, Steve Young, Mark Wilson, even the modern age, Max Hall, Luke Staley. I just feel like Jimmy Mack deserves a spot on that Mount Rushmore. Number 3, it's easy. Jimmer Fredette. He is the face of BYU basketball for many fans, both old and young. Now, there are some older fans out there who would tell you that it should be Danny Ainge. We'll talk about Danny's candidacy here momentarily. But when it comes to Jimmer, who can forget what happened during that 2010-2011 season? I was working my very first year in sports radio. I had the good fortune of working for Greg Wrubell that season, starting out as an intern working on football broadcasts and then being brought onto the staff to work as a studio producer on BYU basketball games that season. What an incredible introduction to sports media and sports radio, working around what Jimmer Mania became. I was getting emails from the biggest names in sports saying, Jake, Greg Wrubell has directed me your direction. Can you send me highlights from what Jimmer did tonight in X whatever game? It was absolutely an incredible year to be working with BYU athletics. I will admit I did not get to as many BYU basketball games that season to actually see Jimmer with my own eyes as I would have liked to have. But it was an incredible experience, and Jimmer Fredette absolutely belongs on the Mount Rushmore of BYU athletics. Now, I mentioned that I would talk about Danny Ainge's candidacy. I originally had Danny Ainge on the faces of BYU's Mount Rushmore, but the more I thought about it, I said, you know what? Looking at it, I'm actually going to give the nod to Elaine Michaelis. Elaine Michaelis, for those of you who don't know, is maybe the most legendary figure that many people don't know about in BYU athletics history. She was around BYU for 5 decades conservatively. She's still technically around the program because she still is going to events here and there. But I believe that Elaine Michaelis really brought BYU women's sports to the forefront of an era when men's sports absolutely dominated and in many respects still dominate. I wanted to put Danny Ainge on there, but I believe that Jimmer Fredette surpassed what Danny accomplished. And I know that Danny led BYU basketball deeper into the NCAA tournament than anybody has. I get all of that. But I mean, he gives the nod to Elaine Michaelis. That may upset some of you, and I can understand that. But what Elaine Michaelis did for BYU athletics, I think is completely underappreciated. I believe that she had been overlooked in the annals of BYU athletics history, and we should celebrate what she accomplished. She made BYU women's volleyball in particular a household name and a perennial contender in whatever conference they competed in for all the years she was the coach of that. She served for a long period as BYU's women's athletic director. They had split athletic directors. Was it Val Hell and her that kind of split duties until Tom Holmoe took over as a singular AD for BYU athletics? So that may be controversial, but that's my four people or 4 names I'm putting on that Mount Rushmore: LaVell, Jimmy Mack, Jimmer, and Elaine Michaelis. Let me know what you think. Am I up in the night in suggesting those names? But those are the 4 I went with after I thought about it. And like I said, I'm open to suggestions, but I've thought about it pretty extensively, and those are the 4 I settled on. And I want Andy, I want you to respond and let me know what yours is, because you said I haven't been able to do it myself, but I welcome any and all feedback on that, because I think it's harder than you might imagine when you consider what it takes to kind of take people off that list, and you have to narrow it down just to 4 people. I know it's crazy. And some people are like, Jim McMahon, Jake, really? That's the guy I picked. I never had the good fortune of seeing Jimmy Mack play for BYU football. All I can go off of is my dad and my grandpa just going crazy about what they watched when Jim McMahon was on the field for BYU. He's considered to be one of the greatest athletes in BYU football history, and for good reason. This is a guy who accomplished all kinds of incredible things. But yeah, that's the 4: LaVell, Jim McMahon, Jimmer, and Elaine Michaelis. Let me know what you think. I welcome your feedback. All right, we'll get to as many more of the questions as we can in the time remaining on today's podcast. Got some good ones here as well. Like I said, today's podcast is chock full of questions, and I've really spent the last 20 minutes working through just two of many of them, but we'll get to as many in the time remaining as we roll on right here on Locked On Cougars. Thank you once again for making Locked On Cougars your first listen of the day. Appreciate all of you for tuning in. Also making your first view of the day if you're watching this on YouTube, looking at my lovely mug every single day. Appreciate all of you for tuning in. If you have not done so already, please sign up for our Locked On Cougars Insider Group. Great way to interact with the show, get insider tidbits for myself, come to your phone in the form of a text message. Not much simpler, not many things more simple than that. 14-day free trial to see if it's the right option for you. Just $5 a month afterwards to be a part of the group. Click the link in the show notes, whether you're watching and or listening to this, and join us today. All right, great questions here. Let's get to as many in the time remaining. Danny asked this: is there a way that BYU can go 8-3? I think you meant to say 8-4 and compete for a Big 12 championship. Danny, I guess in theory there is, but if BYU wants to completely shatter all expectations and just completely rebound to a crazy degree, but if you want to get them to compete for a Big 12 championship this season, they're going to have to get to 10-2. It just feels like that'd be the floor for BYU to be challenging for conference supremacy. Is there a chaos theory out there that the Big 12 literally eats its own week by week, and BYU, if they were 8-4 with tiebreakers and the like, could find themselves playing for a Big 12 championship? Sure, but I think it's going to be 10-2 if they wanted to really do that. And I, for one, am not signing BYU up to make that run. I just don't see that right now. Josh asked this: with more mobile quarterbacks for BYU football, do we expect to see an uptick in RPO plays this year? In a word, yes. Josh, the thing about it is BYU's got two very athletic quarterbacks at the top, speaking of Jake Retzlaff and also Gerry Bohanon. BYU will be unafraid of running both of those guys more than they would have in previous seasons when maybe one or the other would have been the guy for BYU under center. When Jaren Hall went down with that injury, BYU was quite literally dead in the water at the quarterback position. They like the depth they have with those two guys in particular. And even if you had Trayson Bourget as well as McKay Hillstead to the mix, you got a nice quad set of quarterbacks who've got D1 experience and they got some pretty good athleticism and the ability to throw the ball. So yeah, you will see an uptick in RPO plays. Jesse Boone, that actually kind of parlays in Jesse's question here. I believe that Jake is QB1 to start the season, but with Kalani mentioning our top four quarterbacks all have starting experience at the D1 level, how long of a leash do you give Jake before you switch him out? The non-conference slate. That is the longest leash I could give Jake Retzlaff. If he falters, Southern Illinois, SMU, and Wyoming, you get 3 games to prove you are the guy. If not, I would make that change at that point. You've got 3 games if you're Jake Retzlaff. And if he falters at all, yeah, that's when I make that change. So yes, I do believe that you will give him a leash, but it's going to be those 3 games. I really do think it's that short. And maybe that's not short enough for some of you, but that's where I think it stands right now. So this comes from Tyson. Who is your dark horse team to win the Big 12 that isn't BYU? Well, I'll be frank. I'm not having BYU as a dark horse this season. I just don't see it coming to fruition, as I kind of referred to with Danny's question earlier. But the dark horse team to win the Big 12 this season. I am going to say UCF, because I think UCF has got some good things going. And with what Gus Malzahn has done in his coaching tenure as a head coach, there's not many coaches in the Big 12. Frankly, I think he might be the only one who has a national championship ring. So keep an eye on the UCF Knights. The other team to pay attention to, I believe, would be Iowa State. But I am going to say the dark horse for me is probably UCF. That's the one I would pay attention to. Brandon asked this: momentum seems to be building about the health of Bohanon and him winning the starting job after all. I think him starting on college football 25 helped, but his interview with Ben Criddle seemed to suggest he's 110% and throwing better than ever. Have you heard any momentum in that regard, or do you still expect Retzlaff to eventually win the job? I do believe that Gerry is making a push, and he will be given the opportunity to make a push early on in training camp to prove he is the guy. Those of you who are everydayers remember that I had a conversation, I think it was Jay Drew, myself, and I think it was Kevin Reynolds from the Salt Lake Tribune. We sat down with Gerry during a media availability at the end of spring ball, and he all but admitted that he had gone maybe 80 or 90% all of spring. He had not been able to really rip it and really go 100% all out. And he was saying, I'm just being cautious, making sure my shoulder is ready to go. And I can understand the thought process there. What I understand is since that time, he has really ratcheted things up. I have an interview with him in the can that we're going to use next week on the podcast while I'm on vacation, that you'll hear him talk about that. But I do think that he is playing at a higher level and competing at a higher level right now, but he will have ground to make up in training camp. My money is still on Jake Retzlaff ending up as QB1 against Southern Illinois when BYU kicks off the season. But once again, I think he's got 3 games to prove he's the guy. And if he falters at all, Gerry Bohanon, they will not hesitate in putting him in there. Let's see. Next question's coming in here. Brian asked this: if you had the power to make one change to the BYU football schedule this year, what would it be? They talked about this on BYU Sports Nation this weekend. I'd like to hear your thoughts. Not playing at Wyoming, making Wyoming come to Provo once again, or buying out of that game. It's nothing against the Cowboys. And frankly, I'm looking forward. I'm going to make the drive up to Laramie. If you guys want to carpool with me, let me know. Probably not. I'm actually going to be taking my brothers with me. I think they want to pile in with me and drive up there. And we're going to go watch the game in Laramie. But I don't like BYU setting the precedent of being willing to go out there and play G5 teams on their home field in home-and-home arrangements. They just signed a deal with Colorado State for a home-and-home arrangement. Why? Why is BYU kowtowing to G5 programs? I know this sounds like haughty, like, hey, we're BYU and we're a big deal. You know what? You're a Power 4 program now. Live like it. You can demand 2-for-1s. You can do that. And these programs will take it with the fact that they get the 1 return game, but you get the 2 home games. If I were able to change one thing about this year's schedule, it's to make the Wyoming game a home game for BYU. And if I can't have that, I want the BYU Utah game at the end of the season. I'm a traditionalist. I want to see that on rivalry weekend, if I can pronounce that correctly. But that's where I stand on that. Okay, so other questions here before we go. Good question here from Mark. Jake, I've heard 2 different stories. One is that LJ Martin is injured and likely won't make the first game, and the other is completely healthy and the rumors are false. Do you have the correct information on that? Well, I'm not going to be much help because I've been part of both sides of that narrative. Any of you who have been Locked On Cougars insiders or have listened to this podcast who are everydayers know that I have mentioned that I don't believe that LJ Martin is going to be ready for the start of the season. But I had a chance to talk with him earlier this week. We played it on this podcast where I said, you want to address your health? He said, I don't know where those rumors are coming from. I'm ready to go. I'm going to take him at his word, but like I said, I've talked to people around the program who believe that he could be out to start the season. It's not a season-ending injury. Let me be very, very clear about that. I think I got misconstrued on some message boards that I was saying that he is done for the year. That is not the case. I have been told that if he were to miss time, it would be the non-conference slated games, so the first 3 games of the year. That's where things stand. So I'm not much help, Mark, because I'm part of the problem on both sides of that conversation when it comes to LJ. So apologies, but also I'm standing by what I said already about this. All right. And the final word, I think we'll go to Byron here. Maybe we got one more, but let's see. Question. We hear a lot about TJ Woods and the work he is doing, but not a lot about the tight ends coach. Speaking of Kevin Gilbride, how are our young tight ends progressing, and do we expect them to be a greater part of the offense this year? It seems like at times our tight ends disappeared or were forgotten in the past couple of years from the offensive playbook. And Connor Pace said 90% of the offensive mistakes were on the offensive line. If that is the case, and we are to believe that the line will be much improved, why can we not expect a dramatic improvement with the BYU offense? Nothing you've said there, Byron, is out of line. You're right. BYU, if the offensive line is better this year, BYU's offense is going to be better. And Connor Pace, I'll just put it this way. He is absolutely hell-bent on making sure that BYU's offensive line has a better performance. He has got a professional career riding on that fact. That's why he came back, to prove himself at a higher level, to improve his draft stock. So you can guarantee that Connor Pace is going to want a better offensive output. And the offensive line, if they have a better performance, the offense overall is going to be able to succeed at a higher level. They got rid of some problems with the offensive line. Obviously, the coaching was not up to snuff. And spare me with the stuff about me saying that it was about money. I'm just reporting what I know about the situation. It kind of goes back to the conversation I had earlier today. BYU does not want to get in the habit of paying buyout after buyout after buyout for coaches. If they're forced to, they'll do it. But with the situation with Daryl Funk, I think they realized that they signed him probably to a multi-year contract and let him coach it out and hope that things would get better. They did not. Then they made the move at the first opportunity that they had and brought in TJ Woods. You talk about Kevin Gilbride and the young tight ends. BYU is hopeful that the tight ends will force their way onto the field and force BYU to give them the ball. It was Isaac Rex and who else at tight end for the last couple of seasons, really, for BYU. Is that a bad thing? Is it a good thing? You can make heads or tails of that however you want. But Kevin Gilbride wants all these tight ends to be playing at a higher level. And I'm sure that Aaron Roderick would be more than happy to reward them with more looks and more opportunities with the ball should they prove that they're capable of that. You've got to go out there day in and day out in practice as a player and prove to the coaching staff that you deserve the ball in your hands. This is a really exceptionally deep wide receiver core for BYU. So the tight ends, as deep as they are, they're going to have to show that they're as good, if not better, than BYU's wide receivers if they want to get the ball in their hands. Some of it also goes to the quarterback play. What do the quarterbacks prefer to throw the ball to? Zach Wilson loved throwing to his tight ends. Isaac Rex had his career year with Zach Wilson under center. Jaron Hall liked to throw to receivers. That was more of his preference. Keaton Slovis kind of seemed to be between those two extremes. We'll see what Jake Retzlaff prefers. We'll see what Gerry Bohanon prefers. Whoever ends up as the quarterback also will play a role in that. So hopefully that answered all your questions there, Byron, because I think they were great questions, plural, across the board there for you. Let's see. And the final question here comes from Taylor. Okay. So Taylor, this is a good question. I probably should have got this earlier. What is your expectation for the starting lineup on both defense and offense? That is a question that I could build an entire show off of, and I will do that. I am going to build a show off of that for next week while I am out on vacation, and we'll do that over the weekend and get it ready for you guys, and I'll talk about that, what I expect for the starting lineup. I'm going to have to do some research on this, read up on it. There's some guys that I think I can already pencil in and put in pen, frankly. Connor Pay at center, for example, but there are other position groups I have got question marks about. So, Taylor, I will circle back on that, and we'll get back with you early next week on the podcast when it comes to that question. So there you go. That's what I got for you guys on this Friday edition of the show. Have a great weekend. Hope you guys are all doing well out there. No matter what you got going on this weekend, stay cool. It's been really, really hot here in the state of Utah. I know that we're not alone because it's just the part of summer that we're all baking, it feels like, wherever you might be. But have a great weekend, obviously, and we'll be back with you guys early next week. Once again, I'll have stuff in the can for you guys. We will not leave you high and dry while I'm out on vacation. I do not like to do that to you guys. So until Monday, have a great weekend, everybody. Thank you once again for making Locked On Cougars your first listen and or view of the day. And thank you to all of you once again who are everydayers with us right here on the Locked On Cougars podcast.